cold start.
Cold start. That's what we're going with. Welcome to the journey. New podcast here at Ridgecrest. I'm one of your hosts, Broxton Gannon, and I'm joined by other staff members, Chase Falk, Lance Griffin, and Auburn Shepard. So we can get into why we're doing what we're doing in a little bit. But first, let's go around and introduce ourselves. Chase.
No, you're the host, man. You got to tell us who you are first.
Well, I was going to go last, but since you said that. So my name is Broxton Gannon. I've been on staff here for 5 years at Ridgecrest. My title is Director of Internet Ministries. So I oversee our website, our social media, YouTube channel, and apparently now our podcast. So that's pretty much what I do in a nutshell. Chase?
What about your family life, man? Don't we want to hear more than just who he is here at the church, guys?
Do you?
Does the congregation? That's the question.
Okay. Well, I mean, the biggest piece of news in family life right now is we're fostering a five-month-old baby boy.
Who's we?
Me and my wife, Kayla.
All right, there we go. Don't you? I mean, nobody knows. Somebody might not know.
On, dude.
You're internet ministries. So
I am in the basement almost all the time.
So, Broxton, you're married to your wife.
Kayla.
How long y'all been married?
November was 5 years.
All right, and fostering a child right now.
Yep, 5 months old today.
Primarily grew up at Ridgecrest, right?
I did. Are you interviewing me now?
That's my default.
Okay. We can get into why that's your default here later. But, I mean, I can talk more about myself, but hopefully it'll be a long podcast, so we got plenty of time for that.
All right, we'll let him slide for that. What you think, Auburn? Is that enough for now?
We'll let him slide for now.
You got the basics. You got my name. You got what I do. You got my family.
All right. We'll take it. So that's me then. Chase Falk, Minister of Education and Discipleship is my title. Been here at Ridgecrest for over 7 years now. Lance, to your question to Broxton, grew up here, moved away for 10 years or so and been back now for 7. Married to my wife, Lee, and we have 4 kiddos, Collins, Asher, Lila Kate, and Will Taylor.
Lance Griffin, I'm the Director of Men's Ministry and the Recreation Minister here. I've been on staff since 2019. Married to my wife, Melanie, since 2006. We met here. I was a member here since 1997, moved here from North Alabama in 1996 for work with the Dothan Eagle newspaper, and God called me out of that in 2019 and over here.
Auburn?
Yeah, I'm Auburn Shepard. I am a student pastor for our middle school and preteen students, so that incorporates grades 5th through 8th. I've been here, I guess it's almost 4 years in August, and my wife, Samantha, goes here as well, as do your wives, and we have a little boy, Jeter.
That would be cause for concern if she didn't.
Yeah, would be cause for concern. Little boy Jeter, who hopefully will be here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, this might be Auburn's only podcast episode.
It might be. Hey, why not have the first one, the
foreseeable
best one?
future?
For a little while, yeah. So at the recording of this podcast, Auburn is a soon-to-be dad.
Yeah, and as you'll get to know throughout the course of this podcast, some of our personalities and talking in the planning for this podcast, Chase is really worried that he's going to slip up and say something that is present date and that the episode will go live 3 years from now or something like that. So just as a disclaimer, we're recording this in November. We're probably not going to launch the podcast until January. That's okay, Chase.
Well, y'all know my personality. I don't know if it's okay or not, but I got to be okay with it, right?
Yeah, just take a breath. You'll be all right.
All right, there you go. All right, so I mean, I think throughout the course of this podcast, we'll talk about, or at least one of my goals for doing this podcast is that our congregation and maybe even people who are considering visiting Ridgecrest would really understand what we're about as a church, but also what we're about as a staff. Some of us, there's only 4 of us here today because we only have 4 microphones, but we've got several more people on staff. And so, but you hear our titles, like you hear Chase say he's the Minister of Education and Discipleship. And I think you get what that means, but do you really get what that means? I mean, there's a lot more that Chase does than that. There's a lot more that I do than social media and our website. Lance and Auburn are the same way, as is everyone on our staff. And so that's one thing we want to talk about here on the journey. But before we do any of that, which probably won't happen today, I just want to open up, going off the notes that I sent you guys, and just ask, like, what is one thing that you're thinking, like, what are you thinking about today? What's going on in your life? Is there anything, obviously there's certain things maybe we don't need to talk about on a podcast, but if there is, let's talk about it. That's part of the journey.
Yeah. So when you think about the journey and the title of this podcast, I think the interesting thing for us all is to grasp, that God is leading us on a journey of walking with him. And so when you mention our titles, Broxton, I think it's important for all of us to understand that obviously we're so much more than a title. We're not, yes, we're on staff at a church, but the four of us sitting in this room right now talking is just like anybody else outside of, a call on our life that, yes, is going to have some different meanings and some different maybe accountability to it one day, but we're still just everyday guys trying to walk with the Lord and honor him with our life. And so, I think thinking about that, just, let's jump into my story we're laughing at. Can we do that now? Is that how this works?
That is allowed. The
All
people
right,
demand it.
So here's my question as we think about the journey everyday life. Situation at lunch today with a customer service issue. How do you handle a customer service situation that you felt like you were wronged, like it was not an accurate account of what should have happened? How do you handle that and still be light and be like Christ? And is it okay to go and say, hey, I was charged incorrectly, and go through the whole process that could come from that? Or should you just let it go? I don't know. Just love some thoughts on that, because it happened to me literally like 2 hours ago.
I think about that a lot because we're not second-class citizens as church staff, but at the same time, I think the initial thing that you think is, could my reaction be perceived the wrong way, even though I think I may be fully within the realm of normal reaction to press the issue. And so you think about that, and sometimes you hesitate. And also, I know our pastor has said many times that not every battle is Armageddon. And you have that thought in your mind, is like, okay, do you just let this one slide and move on? Or if you really feel you've been wronged, why allow that to happen? So it's a conflicting thing.
I think there's oftentimes a hard time being a staff member and, representing your church and wearing shirts or things of that nature.
Yeah, I didn't have a shirt.
That was going to be my first question. Were you wearing your Ridgecrest staff polo?
That have your church or hey, some sort of Christianity theme on it. And I think the hardest thing is, no matter how respectful you can be in pointing out a potential error, your mind always goes back to oh, well, are they going to judge me now? Even if I've been as nice as possible. So yeah, that's a rock and a hard place.
Well, I think that it's, in my flesh, I responded pretty frustrated. I mean, because I felt that it was not handled correctly. I mean, we're talking $20 here, okay? So, I mean, I don't know if I should say the number or not, but $20, $20. So I felt.
Well, I mean, when you have 4 kids at your.
Yeah, I mean, when we go out to eat, I don't know how it is at your house, but when we go out to eat, man, it's like calculation of deciding where's the best place that we can go, get the best food with the least amount of damage to our bank account. And when you get 6 folks coming in there, that's intense.
So you're 2 hours removed from this, and I know you turn things over in your head a lot.
All the time.
So do you feel like 2 hours later, I made a mistake, or I think I reacted, within reason?
I think 2 hours later, I think I wish I'd have just shown more patience. I think that handling the situation was okay. So going and talking to the lady and working through it is totally okay, because yes, we were wronged in what took place. But looking at it now, I wish I'd have done that more patiently than out of frustration like I did. And I think that's the biggest thing when you think about what would, obviously Jesus didn't sit down at a restaurant and have to deal with something like this. I mean, he dealt with different things, I guess, situationally, but, what would he have done in that situation? And so I think obviously he would have at least been more patient and a little bit more maybe loving. And not that I wasn't loving, but I was just frustrated.
But would you have, so when you told me the story privately off air, it involved the manager asking you, as all managers do, how's everything? Like, would you have, you didn't make a scene, but would you have made a scene if the manager hadn't have come and asked you?
No, probably not.
Because now we're into a thing of, well, if you told him, yeah, everything's fine, then you would have been dishonest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, in a sense of, if he would not have asked the question, I probably would have just let it go and just moved on. So
that's always difficult because my thought, as I was saying, is, my goodness, what if somebody takes me the wrong way and they make a judgment about where I work based on my reaction, whether accurately or not. And then, we can peel that onion back even more, in that, what if they make a judgment about who I represent? What if they make a judgment about Christianity based on that? If they're not a believer, or if they're seeking, and you want to be the best representation of that you can be at the same time, and that's why it's tough.
Lance is wearing his Ridgecrest polo today, so
I am, and I have like 3 times more than y'all do, because I went out and got some on my own, and so I wear them a lot, and I think about that sometimes.
Well, it's a good way to hold yourself accountable.
It is.
It's like, we don't do bumper stickers here. Maybe we should, of our logo, but it's that old joke about you cut somebody off in traffic or any other kind of road rage incident, and then they see that you have a Ridgecrest Baptist Church tag on your car or something like that. So,
yeah,
okay.
Auburn and I have been on many, road trips with student ministry where we had drivers that wanted to take the Ridgecrest magnet off the van so that it wasn't known where they were from when they drove the way they drove.
We've had a couple of drivers actually been called the church, not on like a student trip, but just for, some travel trips, taking a vehicle here and there, and people seeing it and being like, hey, call the church, let them know.
We won't call any of those drivers out.
No.
Yeah, we would never do that. Okay, anything else anybody wants to share? Auburn, like, what are you thinking about right now?
Man, my biggest thought now is like, am I going to have to get this like phone call where I'm not at home and it's like, my water's broke, we got to go. Like, talk about the journey, right? Like, my mind has been racing about like, all right, everywhere I go, am I somewhere to where like I can drive myself, or like I can leave if I need to leave. So that's like my biggest thought, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen, because I like a plan. So very spontaneous doesn't really match up with me.
So you got your bag packed?
I do have a bag packed. So it's kind of funny you say that. Samantha had her bag packed probably 3 weeks ago, and she's been ready probably 3 weeks ago to have this baby. He's pushing 8 pounds right now. We're still a couple weeks away, so she's well on her way to being ready for him to be here. And so then this weekend, Friday night, she stayed up. We got home probably about 8:30 from dinner, and we went down to Graceville. Shout out to Grady's, if any of y'all frequent Grady's.
Grady's Shrimp.
Yes, yep. Awesome.
I've never been there.
Dude, it's worth it. It's worth it. So we get home, and she stays up from like 8:30 to midnight cleaning. And I mean, like, I've never, like, she was in like full on like
nesting, maid
servant mode. Like, I told her, I said, man, I would have taken you to get some shrimp years ago, just joking with her. But then I the next day we went to I had to help my dad with something, and I was telling my mom, and one of my cousins and his wife came over for a little while, and I was telling them, yeah, she cleaned a ton and looks great. Our house looks great. And they were like, you better go pack your bag. Like, this means she's preparing for him to get here, and like, he could come any day, which we already know that. So I went home that night and I was like, yeah, I might want to take their advice. So I've had a bag packed for about 2 days now. But yeah, just waiting on the call. Maybe I told a couple of her students, she works over at Providence. I told a couple of her students, hey, for water breaks in class, just take care of her. And they were like, they looked at me shocked.
As a new dad myself, you have no idea how much your life is about to change.
He mentioned that plan. He likes to have a plan.
There is no plan.
Let's just say the plan is going out the door when the little guy shows up.
Your clean house, gone.
So. Yeah. I'm a little OCD in that, so
gotta
give it to the Lord.
You can clean your house, and that'll be part of your journey. So, okay, Lance. So you just wrapped up Man Church.
Yep. Just wrapped it up last night.
I mean, this kind of fits into other content we might want to get in later weeks, but let's hear about it now. Well,
I was thinking one thing Man Church does is,
for those who don't know, bad host, what is Man Church?
Yeah, it's a way to explore a men's ministry in a small group setting where we look at characteristics of men in the Bible or characteristics of Jesus specifically, and we try to apply those characteristics to our own lives as men. That's basically what Man Church is, and we break up into small groups and talk about that, and hopefully use that as a spark to go out and live the way that God has designed us to live. And so we wrapped that up with our last group last night, and hopefully part of that is for you to be more intentional in how you live your life, and you don't just get in a group and talk and then let that be it and going about your lives. So I got up this morning, and we talk about this in staff sometimes, where it's a Monday. So you got a lot of things you need to do. The calendar at the gym is kind of in disarray, and I'm trying to get all that together. And there's several other things that I know I have to do today because it's a Monday and I'm on vacation next week. But at the same time, part of what I'm trying to keep in the front of my mind in Man Church is you need to be intentional about your interactions with people. And so if I catch myself, I can spend all day in my office and not see anybody. And so even though I feel like I've got a million things to do on the calendar, pushing myself out today and talking to people that come in the gym, it's exercise, and was able to do that. And so hopefully that's just a little small victory.
That was really good podcast content. I wasn't expecting you to say that.
Good stuff.
All right. So
why were you not expecting him to say that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just wanted to know how Man Church was going, but he brought it into the whole, like, here's what God's teaching me right now.
Well, I mean, we are on a podcast called The Journey.
I know.
So, my story, Auburn's story, Lance's story, it's all what the Lord's moving in us.
Yeah,
Well,
you can't be a roadblock in the journey, bro.
You're right.
You said you want to call it The Journey, and I did all this research on Don't Stop Believing, and we haven't even talked about it at all.
So. Well, we were talking about earlier whether or not we were going to have a jingle, and we don't have one right now. But I mean, maybe that should be a thing we explore. But
research copyright on that before you add that to the podcast.
Also, Chase, it sounds like we're going to be recording by ourselves next week. Lance is on vacation. Auburn's about to have a baby.
Hey, if he doesn't come early, I'll be here Monday and Tuesday.
Well, we were thinking about getting you to call in.
Hey,
from the hospital.
I'll call in sick.
From the crib.
We call him from the crib, yeah.
Well, here's the deal. I mean, we got other people, though, that are going to make
we do have more
guest appearances on the podcast.
David was in here helping us do sound check earlier, and we really kind of wanted to avoid the comedy until like episode 6 or 7. But if we lose 2 of our co-hosts after one show, we might not have a choice. All right. But Chase, you mentioned the journey, and it never ends. Okay.
Never.
So my next question is, why this podcast and why now? I mean, I have my own thoughts on why I wanted to do this podcast. We've tried a couple of podcasts here in the past. So that's the question for now is why are we doing this one? Why are we doing it now? Why are we calling it The Journey? What are your thoughts?
Start with me?
Yeah.
I went first last time. Let somebody else go first.
Auburn, you better get in all the answers you can before you have to.
Well, I think podcasts are a great way for people to understand others. I think you've seen just how vital podcasts can be over the past month with some different big things that occurred in our country. And so I think this is something here at church that can be a way for people to understand. Maybe it'd be the ministers, the staff here at Ridgecrest in ways that maybe they don't see them particularly on a Sunday or a Wednesday night. And so this is an outlet that will allow people to see, our journey is just like theirs. Our title may be here as staff members at church, but we're one and the same with every other person. We're just normal people. I think at times it can be hard for ministers because people do view us so differently, and we're all just the same. Our calling is as ministers, but I think this will be a great way for people to really see who we are, to kind of understand more about us, to kind of look at us maybe in a different light of somebody who they can relate to that they've never really maybe experienced before.
Like somebody who gets angry that they were charged for water.
Yeah. I mean, that's a normal occurrence, bro.
Yeah. Everyday life.
Lance?
I think a lot of what Auburn said. I mean, I think in the day that we live in now, podcasts are becoming so much more a part of the mainstream, and it's just what people do, and a way to go a little bit deeper and a little bit more long form. If you want to get to know somebody, you kind of get to hear their thoughts and their interactions every day, and I think it's a good opportunity to learn from each other. Whoever may be around the four microphones, that's certainly going to benefit me, but hopefully it will benefit our listeners to hopefully let them know that, we're kind of normal people probably having the same struggles and dilemmas that y'all are out there.
Maybe even worse.
Yeah.
I think for me, Lance mentioned earlier that I have a normal way of life for me is to overthink and to think through things a lot, and in good and bad. And so, when the average person, I mean, just think about like when we see our people at Ridgecrest, or a lot of people just in general that we spend time with, we don't see them a whole lot. And so when you see somebody, depending on how you are in that moment, obviously dictates your interaction with them. So for the four of us, let's just take our congregation, for instance, on a Sunday morning, we're in work mode. Like we're in go mode, we're running. And you mentioned staying in your office, and like sometimes Sundays, it's just easy for me to be running from one thing to the next, and somebody stopped me, and it's almost like I can probably put off this kind of feeling of like I'm being inconvenienced right now. And like, that's really not who I am. That's not what I want to be. I don't want to be the person that doesn't interact with people. And so, in a setting like this, to say, a little more relaxed and just talking about what's going on allows our listeners and our people and each other, even the four of us in the room, to kind of get to know each other in a greater way. And then I'd say this as far as just the thought of the journey. I mean, our pastor here talks about that, and just how he shares with us that walking with Jesus is just that. It's a journey. It's not this destination that we're just seeking to get. It's about the road that we're walking to get to that destination. And I think we live in a world and a society today that's so destination focused that we miss what God is doing on that directional path as he takes us to get there. So I think it's important for us all to understand that walking with Jesus, as he called the New Testament disciples, he said, come follow me. And he didn't say, come meet me here or come meet me there. He said, follow me, which was a picture of a journey of walking with him. And so for the four of us, we're trying to figure that out for our own lives, and hope that this podcast can be an encouragement to help other people to just understand the importance of walking with the Lord each day.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chase kind of stole some of my answer talking about what we actually mean by the journey, because I feel like he doesn't say it as much as he used to. I feel like the journey never ending was kind of more of a theme when we were growing up here, the three of us. Lance, you didn't necessarily grow up here, but
I did think about this for
he
a
was
quick.
grown up here though.
Yeah,
You see what
I
I'm
did
saying?
think about this for a second though. Just sorry to steal your moment again, but like the four of us have been in this church for a lot of our lives. Isn't that an accurate
I
statement?
mean, I'm 28 years old, and the only time I wasn't here was when I was in school in Alabama. So
Yeah.
that was 4 years.
My first visit here was in May of 1996.
So do the math, Lance, because
That's
like
29.
29 years.
yeah,
I'm
I joined
pushing 28.
officially in 97, but so I've been here since I've been in Dothan.
You said
28. I'm pushing 28.
so. I guess I'm the lowest number because I think we were away for about 8 or so years. So probably 20 to 22 years for me. So, but yeah, 20-something years. in
So
this
we're
place.
emotionally invested in the church,
Yeah.
not just as staff members, but also as like this is our church. Like Chase's dad, Doug, and we're talking about having the entire Falk generation on the podcast. But Chase's dad, Doug, the other day or the other night, sorry, time sensitive, Chase. We had a prayer summit for for the election a couple weeks ago, or a week ago, and Doug shared one of the prayer points, and he talked about the importance of the election for a lot of different reasons, obviously. But he used something that I had not thought about, and he said, there's 4 generations of my family in this church, and so that means, for a lot of reasons, but I mean, that means that this church is very important to me, and this church being able to continue to function as it has for his whole life, for his kids' whole life, his grandkids' whole life, is very important to him. And so, I mean, that got me thinking a lot too. And that's just hammers home the point of we are as staff, not that the other staff members are not emotionally invested in the church, you know what I mean? But having grown up here, we are emotionally invested in it, and we've seen a lot. Even though, I mean, me and Auburn, especially, a lot of what we have seen, we were too young to really know what we were seeing, I guess. But it's just this church has been a constant in our lives. And so back to what the journey is about. Pastor Ray doesn't say it as much as he used to, but when we were growing up here, it was a big theme that the journey never ends. What he does continue to say, at least every week in his column, he ends his column that you can read in the worship folder or on our website. He says, God is always trying to take you someplace new. And so that's really what the journey is about. The journey never ends because God is always trying to take you someplace new. And so that's going to be different for everybody. When I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about on the first episode of the podcast, I thought about, okay, well, what has my journey been like, just away from Ridgecrest, but also as part of Ridgecrest. And we can get into this maybe today, maybe on future episodes. But I feel like I've gone through a big process of figuring out, okay, this is what your ministry actually should be. And so like I have related to my calling and my ministry, I have this stuff that I want to do, but then there's like the day-to-day things that you have to do. And Chase mentioned it earlier about being process oriented, and we all have like a destination in mind, but we forget the journey. And so I think what I wrote down when I was thinking about this was just because you know where your calling is and what your purpose is doesn't mean that you just automatically wind up there. And so that's what part of our goal for this podcast is helping you discover, number one, your calling and your purpose, because that's another big theme here at Ridgecrest that Brother Ray preaches about a lot. I mean, he just finished a 20-part series on purpose. But once you've discovered that purpose, like what does it look like to practically live that out every day?
Yeah, I think that's even going into my story from lunch today, it's understanding how do you and I interact in a dark world that needs light and be that light. And it's easy to do that on Sunday, like churches. I mean, we show up on Sunday and do that. It's easy for us. We come every day to work at a church. But like when real life happens, which it happens, Auburn, you're going to get the call, like more than likely. The call is going to come.
Maybe not. Let's pray not.
You're going to get a call. I mean, or it's going to be the day that she's going to be induced, and that's going to happen. I mean, little dude's going to come. And, how do we respond in those moments? And I can tell y'all, I mean, y'all have been around me. I mean, the joke about my stress level, raising up and my heavy breathing, that y'all give me a hard time about. Like, I don't always respond the best in those situations outside of my church smile on a Sunday or a Wednesday. I'm not always the best responding that way.
Well, I mean, you even mentioned it in your sermon over the summer. We always, especially on a Sunday, you see somebody in the hallway. Hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. And good and well, you're not doing great. And so it's like, well, number one, do you have the time? Do you really want the answer to that question? Or are you just saying that too, because because it's the polite thing to say? But the reality of it is, I mean, a lot of us aren't always doing okay. And so, Lance, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just saying, I don't think it is as much the case now as it was back in the day, but Christianity was considered so much a destination, and you reached your destination at salvation. And in no way, shape, or form would you want to soft play and minimize salvation, but that's not the destination for us that are still alive here. That's the beginning of the next part of your journey. And I don't know how much the church of a previous generation emphasized that. I think hopefully that's different today, but just day to day, how do we impact, just like Chase said, day to day, how do we impact this world for the kingdom intentionally, instead of just thinking that it's going to happen by osmosis and it's just not going to happen. We have to be intentional. And that means sometimes stopping our process-oriented day to have those interactions with people that encourage people, that take people closer to Jesus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I always like not checklist, but somewhat checklist. And so if my order of things gets messed up, I don't tend to like it very much. Not that it really upsets me, but it's just like, come on, I already had this figured out. Everything was together. But like you mentioned, those moments of where it changes and where things come up that you have to deal with, or people you see and those sort of things, those are the moments to me that I feel like always are the ones that blesses me. Moments that you don't plan for, that the Lord knows you need and you don't even know you need, and then you have those moments and it really, it helps give you a boost for whatever season you may be in.
Stepping back, though, and recognizing that is what's hard for me. Because, again, I can be, going throughout my day, and then when interruption comes, it's like, this was not supposed to happen. But I can get in my head and get frustrated, aggravated, worked up, or I can take a deep breath and relax and say, okay, God, you knew this. No, it didn't catch you off guard today that this was going to happen. And, move forward in seeing what it is he's trying to bless me with or show me, or, God, it's kind of like, as guys, I don't know how you are, but like, I like to be on time. I don't know if that's the same for everybody in here, but, sometimes other people in my house don't always like to be on time, so it's like, but my wife Lee's always so good about helping you understand, like, well, you never know what could go on. We were running a little bit late and there could have been an accident or something, and it's like, it really is not that big of a deal, but I make it a big deal.
Yeah, that's true of pretty much everything. I think is, and thinking about time, again, getting frustrated when things happen that don't fit your schedule. It's like, well, is it always a case of everything that you're doing is really that important? Or like, to Lance's point earlier, I've got all this stuff I've got to do because I'm on vacation next week and this is starting the busiest time of year for rec ministry, but there's also people out there that, you know, who knows what they're going through. I mean, and we can get into a big discussion about the sovereignty of God. That's Lance's big answer in staff devotion all the time is God's sovereignty. But I mean, you never know what the person that walked in the RFC, what their day looks like, what they're going through, and how big of a difference just you coming out of your office and speaking to them. And it's not like, I think in ministry, we always think that we have to give like a, you know, okay, well, I'm going to meet everybody and I'm going to have to give them a 10-minute, 15-minute devotional thought for their day. Well, like, I mean, you could start by just saying hello, and I mean, that would probably be good. So I think the restructuring of your time and your priorities to make space for that, which is something I am absolutely terrible at, because I'm introverted by nature and I would always prefer to keep my door closed. So, I mean, I think it's something that we all struggle with.
I think without going deeply down a rabbit hole on this too.
We are here for the rabbit holes.
Well, good. We operate on time because we don't know any other way, but God doesn't operate on time. I'm not even sure we operate on a timeline. You get really into the rabbit hole. God operates on a time sphere or a time plane. You know, he's in the past, he's in the future, he's in the present.
Is falling asleep over here, so be careful.
No, I am not falling asleep. My brain is just below.
His mouth just hit the floor.
It's just thinking about, you know, God's ways are higher than our ways. That's in everything. And in the concept of time, where we think we're beholden to it, if we understand that we're really not, and B, God's really, really not, it does help you to reprioritize those things. It doesn't mean you just completely throw away your calendar and what you need to get done, but it does help you understand that it's not really as important as you think it is.
Lance, was working when you did at the Dothan Eagle, was that idea of what you were doing is really, really important, any different than working in the church?
It's completely different, and I'm still having to reprogram my brain. I operated on a deadline for 20-something years and really thrived on it. I was really good at it. I could take when I was covering sports, you know, I could take a ball game and take 3 hours of that ball game and boil it down to 500 words in 15 minutes. And that was what I was really good at. And then obviously that my responsibilities changed. I started writing other stuff, but I could pick up the newspaper the next day and look and go, I exactly did this, and this yesterday. And I could measure my worth as an employee on a day-to-day basis. And when God called me out of that, and here, one of my friends who had been in the ministry for a long time, he's a chaplain in the Army, he said, first thing you need to do is get a plant. And I said, well, I don't like plants. And he said, take a lesson. And your ministry is a much more drawn out long-term thing than your day-to-day work at the newspaper. And you'll see that plant grow over time. You don't see it grow that day. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, you've got a plan on your hands. And so I try to remember that, but it's still very difficult because I thrived so well in doing an awful lot in a short amount of time for years and years and years and years.
That's a really good snippet, and Auburn knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's a good snippet, and I think that is the hardest thing for us as ministers is to see that, to see something that you've done over the course of time not come to fruition, but really come to fruition. I think about like for students, there's students, and Chase, I'm sure you've had these students where sometimes you just wonder, like, are they here? Like, are they listening
in any way?
Like, yeah. And like, they're great kids. They just, you just maybe like, does any of this resonate with them? And then, you see, months and even years down the road, like, I had a student, for instance, this year who, great student, and you just never know what the student's thinking. And then next thing you know, like, this student accepted the Lord this summer. And it's one of those things where it really puts into perspective, that this isn't just, hey, let's see what you did on Monday and see what you did on Tuesday. This is something that the Lord blesses you to see down the road for times when, maybe aren't so great. And then you look back and you see that and realize, oh, well, maybe I am making a difference. Maybe I am making an impact.
You know what I love about just kind of this conversation for all of us is just it helps us, whether we're the four of us sitting where we sit each day or those that are listening that are just a part of a congregation or just a part of, that work a job outside of the church. There's purpose in everything. Lance, there was purpose in what you were doing. You could see it differently than maybe we can see it, but you and I, all four of us, we have purpose every single day. And Broxton, you already mentioned that, and I think it ties directly in to what we want our listeners to understand through the journey. You have a purpose right now where you are, whether it's big, whether it's little, whether it's really seen by you or not seen by you right now. There is a purpose. I think about, some of the seasons of life that our family's gone through and situations, for like Lee, even at home, where there was not a whole lot of, results oriented things of what she saw as a stay-at-home mom type in a result or purpose. But clearly, raising these kids, there's purpose in that. And so I think it's true for all of us and important. And one of the things that we want to make sure those that are listening grasp when they think about, and you think about, we think about the journey God has on us.
Yeah. I think just to continue on this point, the analogy about the plant is really good. I was talking the other day with a friend of mine that I met over the internet. There's not many people that do what I like. This is what I do, such a new thing in ministry, I guess, that there's not a lot of us. So it's harder for me to network than it is for like a student pastor or something. But anyway, I've made a few friends, and we were talking the other day, and
a few friends,
just a few.
For an introvert, that's plenty.
Yeah, for an introvert,
that's a bushel. And
especially if you're doing it online, like it's the best of both worlds because you never actually have to hang out.
Oh my goodness! So if you're Broxton's friend, he's just thankful to have you, but he does not want to hang out with you.
But we were talking about because it's such a new position, we're all trying to figure out like, okay, whether your job title is online pastor, which personally I don't know what I feel about that, or director of internet ministries, which is like a safer theological term for online pastor, or anything like that. You're just trying to figure out like, okay, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? Like obviously we upload our sermons, we upload our worship services, we maintain things like a website and stuff like that. But beyond that, like, not that stuff doesn't matter, because if people want to go watch the sermon and they can't find it, well, then you're not doing a good job. But that's like the small stuff in ministry for our side of things that is kind of like not as enjoyable as the more bigger picture type thing. So we were talking about that, and we were talking about the way social media works and the way that social media like forms and disciples people. Because your first inclination, if you haven't had any kind of experience outside of ministry, it's kind of like, well, I've got to start a YouTube channel and I've got to do these devotions, and I'm basically just going to be a pastor and I'm going to preach my own sermons, but I'm just going to do it online. And like, I guess there's a certain place for that. I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but it's really more of just being a normal Christian if you're online. And I mean, I wouldn't encourage people to spend more time on social media. But if you're already on social media, then be a Christian while you're there. And so the thing that we were talking about was, we've been online for our formative years, like for a long time, as social media has grown and the internet has grown. And so like, you can't remember every tweet you've ever seen or every YouTube video you've ever watched or podcast that you've ever listened to, but those things have formed you in a certain way. Like, and it's the culture of the internet, like there's memes and stuff like that, but they have formed you whether or not you're willing to admit that. and they're either going to form you in a positive way or a negative way. They're going to form you to be more like Christ or less like Christ. And so, I mean, that's just stuff that I'm thinking about like all the time on my journey of like, okay, well, how do I do that here for our people? But it's a good example of the plant analogy, that this kind of stuff just, it happens over time. It's really easy to think about, okay, well, ministry is just Sunday and Wednesday. And some people make that joke of like, oh, I only thought you worked on Sunday and Wednesday and that's it. What do you do the rest of the week? Well, it's this kind of stuff. We think about like what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that gets back to an earlier question for me of like, why this podcast and why now? It's because I think in my first 5 years here, I've missed a lot of that by not doing something like this that is more formative than just a random sermon clip here or there on Instagram Reels.
Formative is a good word. I think we can all benefit from that, and hopefully others can too. And what you were talking about with, you would not advise anyone to spend more time on social media, it just got me to thinking about my social media presence, which you can go back and look at everything like Facebook. You can go back and look at everything you posted since you've been on Facebook, and my timeline is way different than it was 2015, 16, 17. Just because I think you are your timeline to a great extent. And what's important to me now, or what was important to me then, is not really what's important to me now. And I hope that means I'm maturing in my faith. I hope that's a sign of that. But it made me think about that when you said that.
So what would I have read from Lance in 2015 on your timeline?
Tax policy and, what foreign policy. And
To be fair, you were the editor of a local newspaper then.
for a couple of years I was. And so I was immersed in that. And I guess, what you immerse yourself in is kind of what pops up in your posts and things like that. But those things were important to me personally too. And I'm not flippant about those things now. I think those things matter, but it's not what I want to get online and broadcast to the world, to a great extent. I mean, I will occasionally,
And you can read that at, what is your lancegriffin.substack.com?
View to a Quill, yeah.
View to a Quill.
I
Yes,
write
sir.
about stuff like that occasionally. But when I get online, I want it to be encouraging, if it can be. If I post something on Facebook, I want it to be the gospel, which I'll just post the gospel every once in a while. Hopefully somebody will come across it that needed to see it that day. And those 4 or 5 post a day things about all those other things, I'll post maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks now.
Reminds me of, how hard James is when it says to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and that mentality of, I don't know, in our formative, becoming more like Christ and growing more like him each day, those, that verse, I think, not that it's always perfect, but it comes to light more and more. Like, do I really want to use my voice to talk about these things, or do I want to use my voice to talk about other stuff? I just find myself don't doing a lot of talking, period. I don't even know that when the last time I posted something on social media, so I don't know if that's good or bad. But Broxton, you might hate me for that. But
No, as I said, I have to be careful here, but like,
safe place, man.
well, I mean, in a sense it is my office, but there are microphones. So, I have to guard against this myself because like being responsible for social media, it's like I feel the need to be on social media. And I do have to, but like there's a lot of different social media and I'm more drawn to certain kinds of social media than I am others. Like I really don't like Facebook that much. Because now it's to the point where I can't get on Facebook without seeing, like I could get on Facebook and spend 15 minutes and I'd probably see 2 things from somebody I actually know.
Yeah.
And like, that's really frustrating given that the point of Facebook was to stay connected with people you know. Instagram, same thing. And it's just getting worse. And TikTok, even worse than that. YouTube and X, formerly known as Twitter, are different because they're almost like made to be not that, if that makes sense. I mean, would you agree with that, Lance? So like, when you're getting on Twitter that you're going to be talking about sports or politics or, I mean, that's pretty much it. You're not necessarily looking to see what your cousin shared.
Yeah, I was an early adopter on Twitter, which I don't know, I'd have to go back and see, but I think 2009 is when I jumped on, and I just, being a journalist or an editor, those were some of the earliest adopters of that too. And I thought, okay, well, there's going to be a community of journalists that I can see what they're writing about, what they're reporting about, and maybe even gain some story ideas from that now. But it has evolved so much to how the algorithm has evolved that even though the algorithm is supposed to surface what you want, it really don't, because it's based on engagement, and sometimes you just click on something because you're wondering who in the world would comment on that. And all of a sudden now the algorithm thinks, oh, well, let's give Lance 450 of those in the next 3 minutes. And that's not really what you want. So it's hard to fight through those things sometimes and really have it be beneficial.
Auburn, you were about to say something before I interrupted you.
Yeah, I feel like I spend a good amount of time on social media, but it's just like I'm a lurker, if that makes sense.
Auburn needs to post more.
Okay, my wife tells me this all the time.
You need a Substack.
You need to share our stuff on Facebook, share our stuff on Instagram. And it's not that I don't love any of those things or I'm not excited about those things. I'm just like, why do I need to share it? Like everybody already knows about me. Like, why do I need to keep sharing it? So I do need to do a better job at that. But most of the time I spend is just like looking at what other people post. And I feel like at times it's a good thing because it doesn't get yourself in trouble saying, commenting back to someone or addressing something that you see. But then other times I think it can hinder you as well because, maybe you're not as vocal or as transparent in an issue or a topic. And so I think that's where social media has kind of like, it's hard to find a middle ground of like, hey, I'm just keeping up with people, or like, hey, I want to know the news, versus like, hey, I'm trying to avoid jumping into something that don't want to be involved in a comment feed or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that this could be dangerous territory, but I mean, there's not much to gain in arguing on social media. My general ministry philosophy for social media is, and this is like 40,000 foot view, and I don't always do a good job at it. Most of the time I don't, but would it be better if social media didn't exist? Probably.
But it does.
And so there are going to be people that are going, like, you don't have to, as you said earlier, Brother A talks about a lot, that not every battle is Armageddon. So not every Facebook post is Armageddon. But some of them, one of them might be. And so.
Well, along those lines, I mean, we're in a unique position because Christians have never had the platform that they have now. When Facebook jumped from being a college-only platform to being open to the public, I said, there's no reason I should ever be on Facebook ever, because I don't know more than 50 people. I'll never have more than 50 friends on Facebook, ever.
Wrong.
And
they're still not your friends, though.
Well, that's true to a great extent as well. But now, I've got 2,500 or something like that. I don't know. But we've never been able to amplify our message. Normal, everyday Christian people, we've never been able to amplify our message more now than any time in history. And that's made me think as much about what I post or don't post, or what I react to or don't react to, as much as anything, because we've got this huge platform that can be used to really help impact the gospel for good, or as we see all the time, it can really negatively impact as well. And that's probably one of the reasons I post about 1/10 as much as I used to, because I want to make sure that I'm not damaging things with the platform that I have. And I would hope that would be true for all of us, but I cringe sometimes.
How do you navigate posting less? So I think for somebody like me that does not post at all, like I don't know when I haven't posted like pictures of kids or
Pull that up, Auburn.
anything. The last time,
Auburn's about to have to leave.
when was the last time I posted anything? So for me, somebody that doesn't post anything, for you, you're navigating, you're posting 1/10 of what you used to post. So it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is how do we not get sucked into the world of social media, but also still use our social media for a platform for the gospel? I guess is maybe the way I'm trying to kind of navigate that question. Because Auburn, you say you just look, and if I almost have to be all in or not. So like I'm deleting everything off my phone. So like right now I don't have any social media on my phone. So like I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but how do you use your platform to not get sucked into the how do you say it, algorithms?
Chase, before we answer that question, Chase last posted on August 12th when he was selling his truck on Facebook.
Okay, that didn't count. I'll sell my truck.
Count. Yeah.
No, that doesn't count.
That was a marketplace, bro.
August 3rd, Pine Cove family.
Which is a perfectly reasonable use of your timeline.
That doesn't count either. That was like changing my profile. Like go to see like an actual post.
I've already closed the app. I'm sorry. Ask your question again.
I think they got the question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it really depends on, is this who you genuinely are, or is this just who you want people to see you as? I think that's a big difference. I think it's okay to post stuff, but if you're just posting stuff to be like, oh, I'm a Christian content warrior, like it's not really the message, behind it. Whereas if you wake up and you feel like the Lord's placed it on you to say this or say that, I think that's different. So I think there can be a fine line, but I also think, that it doesn't, it really just depends where your heart's at, in my opinion.
I think learning and understanding that you are not going to win arguments on social media really helps a lot. And the last time I engaged with someone on social media was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it. And it's the only time, like within 5 years I have probably, but it went back to when the Olympics was going on. And there was a post about the boxer that my belief is probably should not have been allowed to compete. And it was respectful. It wasn't ugly in any way. I just said, I think I disagree with you, and here are my reasons. And man, everybody came out of the woodwork, and the response was just crazy. And I'm like, okay, I just need to back out of this before it gets way out of hand. And it's really not, again, it's not having a positive impact on things. And so I think understanding that and just allowing you to be in control, because I had ceded control to the person that I reacted to, and trying to manage your own content that way and being smart about it, I think can have a positive impact. I just had a moment of weakness there.
Yeah. So Chase, do you have an update?
2023.
Wow.
Okay, that's not
So
bad.
like an actual like last like post, I shared something from the student ministry in, let's see here, it was February of 2023.
One of my last ones that I remember was a little video I did that asked my listeners on my radio show and my followers on Facebook to donate to Wiregrass Hope Group, which, things like that.
I guess that, as I process that personally, I do think, again, my personality, I'm all in or I'm not. So it's hard for me to say, like, it's been a blessing not to have Facebook to me on my phone.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Have Instagram on my phone, not to just be constantly swiping through whatever. But also, it's an opportunity, as Broxton says, and he does a really good job of thinking about that, as like using your platform. And for, the average person listening that's a follower of Christ, that's a part of our church, that's a part of seeking to be a part of the journey God's called them to, it is an avenue now that people can use, as you said too, Lance, to make a greater difference than we ever had before. I used to say this in student ministry all the time, that I believe that this generation right now has the ability to change the world unlike any other generation. And I think a lot of that has to do with technology. But again, it's how much are we allowing it to impact us versus us use it and allow God to, maximize it for his impact.
Yeah, I think this was back to my ministry question. Like if I think about in Ephesians 4, I think it is, when Paul says that our job is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And that's we talk a lot about that in staff devotion too, that, a lot of times people think that it's our job to do all the ministry. And it is our job to do ministry, but our ministry is equipping the saints to do ministry, which is part of the reason, again, why we're doing this podcast, to help you on your journey so that you can help people on their journey. But just thinking about this conversation, in a perfect world, if I could train, 1,000 people from our church to be like some kind of influencer, you would think that would be a good return on investment for my ministry. But the problem with that is, number one, I'm not an influencer, don't want to be an influencer. Like I said earlier, if social media went away, that'd be better. But it's not for everybody, because not everybody has, like if you have the temptation to get involved in a discussion on Facebook that's not going to profit or encourage anyone, then, God can do anything. Pray that he can change your mind, but you should probably just avoid that. And I think my own problem too has been, I'm using social media to do ministry, but then I end up just doing what Auburn does and just lurk around. And just, yeah, I'm a lurker. So, that's hard for everybody, but it's like I said earlier, would it be better if it didn't exist? Probably, but it does exist. So if you're going to participate, it is an opportunity to be salt and light. So.
Yeah, it makes me just think about this idea of, I guess is it the Watchman e-book, The Normal Christian Life? Does that sound right? Anyways, the terminology of that thought, the normal Christian life. And so for us right now in our world today, our normal life should be, directed from our time with Jesus, walking with him, and then engaging our world. And so I think that social media is a part of our world. So if that is something God has given you as an opportunity to utilize it. But for me, I think it's probably, like you said, I have to understand it's better for me to distance myself from that versus getting caught up in it. Because I can't just stop. I'm going to just, as Auburn said, keep lurking.
It's interesting because social media is a kind of a microcosm of life, because really all of life is about regulating. And your decision to just basically not be involved in the social media aspect of the world is a way for you to regulate, because you know yourself.
That's good.
And you could apply that to just about anything. And, if you if you know your weaknesses, you know, you don't want to dive into the middle of what may not be beneficial for you or the kingdom.
All right. So we've been going an hour, and we have more questions to cover, but that's up to y'all. Like we didn't know if we wanted to make this a 15-minute deal or if that would be putting us into a box. So what do y'all, Auburn had to leave to do something with his truck. He did not get the call. He had an oil change or something. So Auburn's not here, but if y'all are still good, we can go a little bit longer.
I can go a little bit longer.
You're the host, man. Take it how you want to take it.
All right. So I wanted to ask one or both of you if you could share about a time in your own life that you felt called to a new place, either literally, spiritually, in ministry, or all of the above. So we kind of veered off with a social media discussion, which was good because it was good stuff. But thinking about the journey and thinking about this idea of God always is trying to take you someplace new. Do you have examples of that? Like I know, Chase, you mentioned earlier that you've grown up at Ridgecrest with the exception of a few years when you're on staff at other churches. Lance, you haven't always been in ministry or a newspaper editor. So I'll open that up for discussion.
I think I remember always hearing Isaiah's words, "Here am I, send me," as God said, whom shall I send? Whom shall I send? And Isaiah uses that great line in those words of, "Here am I, send me." And I remember as a college student, praying that. I remember working in a after college class job, for, I don't even remember, not very many hours, just kind of while I was in school. And just finding myself knowing that God had called me to ministry, but not knowing really what that looked like yet. And just going and praying that in different settings around where I was working. And so I guess I just say that to say, the journey of God calling you to something, for me at least, comes from just your daily surrender to Him, of our willingness to say, God, I'm yours. I'm here for your purpose. This life is not of me. Luke 9:23, to take up your cross, to deny yourself and follow Him. Like it's not about me. And, that surrender and denial of self being a groundwork for a experience of God to take you somewhere new or to be on a journey with Him. And so I remember doing those things and experiencing that. And, really it's just been just what we've been talking about. It's kind of funny to think about it, but just that of a journey. Like we went from one kind of thing to the next. Everywhere we felt God calling us to, we jumped headfirst in, and we're a part of that. And there'd be a season that would come, and opportunities would come, and we'd pray through that, seriously take that into consideration, and through prayer and through, in wisdom from other people, felt like God confirmed we were supposed to go somewhere else or stay where we were. So I guess just in kind of a big picture idea of that, it comes out of surrender, and then out of, I think opportunities potentially coming, or a restlessness in your own heart that God is doing something different. Like He's closing a door for where you are and He's opening the next door. And I think that's something that I've always seen, that God always clearly on the journey released us. I don't know how to fully describe that, but kind of had this feeling of released from a location or from something, but then an acceptance of what was next. Like we were able, as much as you love people, as much you were excited about where you were and all that kind of stuff, you were able to just kind of say, man, we know our time here is coming to an end and God is opening here, and we're all we know to do is turn there. Didn't always make sense. Wasn't always the most exciting thing. For us, it was moves. We've moved and moved and moved. And, by the time you get to now a family of 6, a move is not real easy. So there's a lot of stuff in my house. And so, not always exciting, but knowing that God was in it and just taking, you heard the next right step kind of mentality. Like we're just going to take this step and trust that God's going to kind of bring it all together. And at the end of the day, looking back now from, making that kind of journey around to being back to where we are, I mean, he always did bring it together, and it all, worked out. It wasn't always easy, but it always happened.
I had a girlfriend in high school, and she had her whole life mapped out from 17 on, where she was going to go to school, where her first job was going to be, her second job, her third job. Then she would wind up here. That would be where the family would settle, et cetera, et cetera. Needless to say, it didn't work out like that at all. It worked out good for her, but it was nowhere near that. And I was starting to develop a worldview at the time there anyway, that basically, if you think of life being a blank sheet of paper and you've given your life to Christ, I'm just signing the bottom of it. And I'm just saying, Lord, wherever you want to take me is absolutely where I want to be, whether that's physically or just in life in general. And it isn't that I've been a non-participant in that. I mean, I have to the extent that I know how, but with kids, Chase, you'll see your kids crawling in the direction of danger, and sometimes you have to go over there and you've got to pick them up and you've got to set them on a different path. And I think God's done that with me kind of throughout my whole life, and what he has filled in on my blank sheet of paper is better than anything I could have filled in on my own without him. And so I just try to be open to God's whatever, which is one of the things I have in my room at home. I told my niece that one time, you need to be open to God's whatever. And so she made a little collage of the word whatever and gave it to me. So I put it up in my room. So that's what I've tried to do.
What about you, Broxton?
Well, Lance, I have a question for you first. How do I want to word this? So I think the first problem with talking about this with people is that people are so scared that they're gonna, when you say, okay, I'm gonna put my yes on the table and I'll be open to God's whatever, that the whatever is going to be Africa or Japan or China or whatever.
Is that the podcast title?
No,
whatever.
Because there is a podcast called Whatever, and we want nothing to do with it.
Good to
Not
know.
the podcast itself title, the episode title.
Okay.
Maybe that.
But so people are scared, like if I want to serve and I want to do, I understand the concept of the journey. But basically I'm scared of what God's going to call me to do. Is God going to call me to leave my family? Even if it's not, moving to Africa, like, am I going to have to move to South Dakota or something like that? I mean, just even in the United States. So I think that scares people off a lot of the time. But I also think another side of it that is kind of putting it in reverse is not everybody who is called to ministry is called to vocational ministry. And I think we, not as Ridgecrest, but like just the church in general, we often do Christians a disservice talking about what is God calling you to do, because we always kind of imply that, well, that means you're going to have to be a student pastor and you're never going to make any money and you're never going to, it's just going to be miserable. But in fact, God needs and uses people in all different types of roles and capacities. That's the point of equipping the saints for the work of ministry. So can you, when you were a newspaper editor, you were in journalism for a long time, you finally made it to an editor. I would imagine that, even though the Dothan Eagle is not like a national newspaper, that maybe when you started out, being an editor was probably a goal of yours. And so when you started feeling a call to ministry, what was that like? Did you get to a point where you're like, okay, I feel called to ministry, but I no longer feel that I can fulfill that call in the newspaper industry? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because I'm fully convinced that I was called into my vocation as a journalist. I believe that's what God had me do from 1993 to 2019. I think that was his plan for me. the business, the industry that God chose for me began to completely change and practically collapse over the last dozen years or so. And along about probably 2015, 16, somewhere along in there, I felt like that I would not be in the industry that much longer. I still had a blank sheet. I didn't have an idea of what that meant after journalism. And when an opportunity arose for vocational ministry, I did what I did with anything else. I prayed about it, went to Melanie, and we both prayed about it and took it to the Lord and said, if this is a door, that you're opening for me, please help me understand that and help it be something that I feel compelled to, if that's what your desire is for me. And that's kind of how I've tried to do anything. And it was really almost as seamless as you can get, which hopefully is a confirmation. Sometimes you can read things into things that aren't there, but the way a door closed and opened is sometimes a very good way. And Melanie and I both felt at peace about it, and it's been a very fulfilling and meaningful transition.
All right. So Chase, you were the opposite of that. I mean, you felt called to ministry when you were in college or late high school at Wired as a track leader one year. So Auburn's actually technically out of the club because he sold insurance for about 2 months before he came. So, but you and I both have never really done anything other than ministry. I mean, you're a little bit older than me, but so like when you felt your call to ministry, have you ever been the opposite of Lance, where you knew that did you know it was always going to be vocational ministry, like in a church, whether it's student ministry or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, really never thought I would do. I really hadn't once I felt called, which would have been the summer of my freshman year of college. So I went through a full semester my freshman year of college, and then that summer is when I felt like the Lord was calling me to ministry. Didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but felt as if it would be some sort of, to what I knew, some sort of full-time. It would be what I did. It was not ever going to be like, hey, I'm going to do this and this. I'm going to do, whatever, or I'm going to just, serve in the church and do another job. It really was never that. It was always I would do some sort of full-time ministry. So I pursued that, and the Lord began opening those doors, kind of like Lance mentioned, as far as, just an opportunities, and started stepping through the ones that I felt like were the ones I was supposed to step through. I mean, to begin with, though, there was a season where I was still working part-time and doing full-time ministry to an extent, but working part-time, and I had to do something different. I remember substitute teaching, working at a church on Monday, Tuesday, or Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or something like that, and substitute teaching the other 2 days of the week. So basically working at a church for 3 days, and then I was Mr. Falk for 2 other days of the week. And so,
what did you teach?
Whatever I need to sub for. It just depended on the day. So we were living in Florida at the time, and I'd sub anywhere from young kids to high school kids, and it just depended on the day. My favorite ones were PE, where I got to hang out in the outside or play basketball. But the only problem with PE, one day I had a kid steal my cell phone. I do remember that. I was substitute teaching, and I left it on the bleachers in the gym, and that cell phone is still somewhere around Rutherford High School in Panama City.
How about
right now.
that?
So anyways, yeah, so there was moments where I had to we had to figure out. God provided. Lee was making door hangers like crazy. It was just a cool story how God provided through those times where, it didn't seem like it would all make sense. But it was always I always felt like this was the path of some sort of full-time ministry, and just trusted that the Lord would take care of us in that, and He has. And so transitioned, though, to, having the blessing and opportunity to work in a church, up until this point.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I mean, I guess there's two ways I could go with my answer to the journey. I mean, there's a lot I could say about figuring out my ministry here and different things we've done. And, when I felt called to ministry my freshman year of college, I just basically started doing whatever I could in church. And I mean, that's what Brother Ray always tells people, like, not even if you're not called to vocational ministry, just say yes and start serving, and you'll start to learn your passions and your interests and what you're good at and what you're not good at. And so, I mean, people will give you a chance to serve. So I started doing that, and I did that here when I was home for the summer, helping David with media stuff. And when I got here, is sitting in this very office. This used to be David's office. And I was like, well, David, what are we going to do this summer? And he said, well, I don't know. We don't really have anybody to manage our social media and our website. Technically falls under me. So if you want to do that, you can do that. And so I started doing that, obviously, and that would have been 2018. And then I went back to school and did some of that remotely from Tuscaloosa. And then in 2019, they offered me to come on staff full time. And obviously I took it. I've been here ever since. But even that is such a weird thing, because when you're a really young guy in ministry and you feel you're called to ministry, there's so much of you that just wants to like get to wherever it is. Like when you were a track leader, I would imagine, and you felt that call to ministry, it was like you're literally doing ministry right then, but you just couldn't wait to get to be a student pastor. And
Destination.
When you were subbing, you were a student pastor literally, but you were also having to sub.
The best influence in the life of a teenager is a teacher.
Well, and I was going to bring that up. Like you literally could have had more impact as a teacher than a student pastor, because the kids have no choice but to listen to you every day, whereas they definitely have a choice to come spend an hour on Wednesday nights. But anyway, I had to deal with that a lot, and finishing my last 2.5 to 3 years of school was really hard, because I was like, I don't need any of this. I don't want to be here. I'd rather be doing ministry. But then you get here and it's like, okay, well, I've arrived at the destination. Now what do I do? There's all these questions. There's nobody that's going to tell me how to do what I'm supposed to do, because nobody can really answer it. And so then that's when you just have to say, God, you brought me here. So what is your plan for this? And what are we going to do? And for me, that's had a lot of different variations, but I think that I wish we had done a podcast like this 3 years ago. Because I think a lot of my problem with social media has been, I'm an overthinker like Chase, and I like to think big picture. But the problem with social media is you can create a post and you've put a lot of thought into it, or not put a lot of thought into it, but just felt like you needed to do it. And somebody will see it. Maybe somebody will like it, comment, share it. But 30 minutes from now, they're not going to, that thing is way down the feed. They'll never find that thing again. So it's that whole thing that we talked about earlier of, it's not that it's not important, but it does form you in some way, but not in the same way that a long form podcast is going to, and Lance could probably say a lot about that because of the state of his industry, his former industry, and how social media changed that. But I think to kind of wrap that up a little bit, a part of my journey has been figuring out, okay, here's a couple things I like, but then there's other things over here that probably a lot more gifted at, and are going to maximize and impact a lot more. And it's just been a journey of figuring that out. So,
yeah, I think the key in what you're saying there is really, for me at least, coming back to a place of trying to, first off, understand who I am, understand my gifts, understanding my personality, and being okay with that. Like, I'm not going to be what I see other pastors do or other staff members do, or we're not going to be, a church that does everything like everybody else. And so just being okay with, this is who we are, this is who I am, and relaxing in where I am, not coasting or like not, trying hard, but just relaxing with where you are and seeking the Lord to fulfill what he's calling you to do, and just doing what you can to do that where he has you in this moment.
I mean, there's no blueprint for everything. And I think that's part of our problem too, is, God told Adam to name the animals. God didn't say you're going to, like, he entrusted Adam with that, and that was Adam's thing. And God didn't really care what Adam named the animals. And so it was the act of delegating part of the creation mandate there. And it's the same for us. Like, we were talking about, like, what is this podcast going to look like? What are we going to do? And, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, that, just turn on the microphones and start talking. And I think it's different for everyone, because the way Lance does rec ministry is not the way that somebody else might do rec ministry. And it doesn't mean that God couldn't use somebody else too. But we are the ones that God has put here, at least for the time being. And so that's true for listeners as well, that, wherever you are, whatever, title you hold, or even if you don't hold a title, like, wherever you are on your journey, it's, you've been put there for a reason, like we've talked about. So
maybe the way we wrap this podcast up today is by answering this question, Broxton, since you just brought this up. Is there any animal, if you were Adam, that you would name differently than one of the animals that obviously Adam named? Any animal? I mean, just think about that. There's a lot of animals out there.
The platypus has to go.
Think so?
Platypus is gone.
What would you name the platypus if it wasn't the platypus?
A gurgle.
A gurgle. I was thinking about the piranha.
I mean, if you run into a duck-bill gurgle, I mean, think about that.
Piranha. I mean, that's just a hard. I read a kid's book the other night to Will Taylor, and it had piranha in there, and I was like, that one's just, I wouldn't have named that a piranha.
What would you have named it?
Oh, I didn't think that deeply, but I just asked that same question to you, so I got to come up with something.
Yep.
I think I would name something like that. Oh, me. This is so dumb. The Destroyer.
Could it be any dumber than Gurgle? The Destroyer.
The Destroyer is what I'm going with. Just the Destroyer.
Well, I don't have a name that I would.
No, you got to answer it. We all had to answer it.
Well, I mean, I was just going to, if you can get rid of a snake, I mean, that's like the worst animal that there is.
Like altogether? I'm with you.
Okay, yes, I can go with that.
Like,
so we'll just let Broxton slide. He doesn't have to rename it because we just all three agreed to get rid of the snakes.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
All the snakes.
All right, so that's episode 1. We do want to encourage you to share your journey with us. We haven't tested it yet, so I hope by the time that we're listening to this episode that it's going to work. But we have set up an email address. It is thejourney@rbcdothan.org. And so one thing that we want to focus on as we talk about helping you on your journey is seeing what we can do community-wise with this, and not just be a thing that, 4 ministers, 4 staff members get in a room with microphones and just talk. We want to encourage you that the journey isn't just for pastors. It's for everyone, like we've been talking about all afternoon. So if you want to email us your journey or what God's teaching you, we would be encouraged by that, and hopefully it would encourage others. So you can email us at thejourney@rbcdothan.org. We'll see you next time.
See ya.